The vote passed at 14:03 station time. I watched it happen from the observation gallery of the UES Adamant, my fingers wrapped around a cold cup of synthetic coffee I had forgotten to drink. The chamber below was enormous, a hollow sphere of tiered seats carved from pale stone, filled with delegates from 214 species. Their translator implants hummed at different frequencies. The air smelled of 3 different atmospheres pumped through separate ventilation systems, so no one had to breathe anything they didn't choose. 211 votes in favor, 3 against, 1 abstention. The directive passed with the kind of quiet efficiency that powerful institutions use when they want to pretend something is routine. A bureaucratic vote, a procedural matter. Nothing personal. I set the coffee down and didn't look away from the floor. Directive 7 Omega, permanent quarantine of Earth's solar system and all human-registered vessels beyond the Oort perimeter. No trade routes, no communication relays, no rite of passage. Effective in 72 hours. Framed, in the official language, as a biosecurity precaution, a temporary measure pending review. The kind of language that meant forever, if no one pushed back. Our ambassador, Director Hale, sat at the human delegation table, with her hands folded in front of her, and her face completely still. I had known her for 11 years. That stillness meant she was angrier than I had ever seen her. I thought about the Secretary General's speech 6 months ago, in that same chamber, the way her voice had carried without rising, the way she had looked at each delegation in turn before she said it. You may sanction us, fine us, expel us. You will not enter our hospitals and take medicine from dying people. That is where we stop. The council had smiled. They had nodded in the patient, gentle way that powerful people nod when they have already decided the outcome. I had watched from a different gallery that day too, and I had thought, they don't understand what she just said. They heard a warning. She was giving them a map. My communicator buzzed. It was my second in command, Petrov. The message was 4 words, 72 hours, we move. I finished the cold coffee in 1 swallow and left. I should explain what I do, because it matters. My name is Commander Yara Vasquez. I run field operations for the United Earth Humanitarian Division, the UAID. We are the part of Earth's interstellar presence that goes places no one else goes. Methane atmosphere cave systems after a collapse. Plague ships quarantined so far out that the nearest council response team is 3 weeks away. Habitat failures on moons that no other species considers strategically interesting enough to bother with. In 80 years of probationary membership in the galactic community, humans had never been given a permanent council seat. We were considered useful, endearing, in the way that young species sometimes are, occasionally alarming. The official position of most council members was that humans showed great promise and required careful supervision. What they meant was, keep them small, keep them dependent, keep them grateful. For a long time it worked. We needed their trade lanes. We needed their medical licensing agreements. We needed the technology frameworks they controlled through layer after layer of intellectual property law that we had no power to challenge. The Voss syndrome treatment was a perfect example. 400 million humans suffered from it. A degenerative neural condition that stripped the myelin coating from nerve fibers and left people unable to walk, speak, or think clearly within a decade of onset. The Keth had developed a gene therapy cure 40 years ago. Effective, elegant, and priced so far beyond what most human health programs could afford that we might as well have been looking at it through glass. So our scientists derived their own version. It took 19 years. It worked. It cost a fraction of the licensed price. And it was, technically, a violation of the Keth's intellectual property agreement with the Council. That was the real reason for the vote. Not biosecurity, not volatility. We had built something they wanted to control, and we had given it away for free, and they had decided to remind us of our place. The thing about our place, though, was that we had spent 8 years quietly making sure it was very different from what the Council thought. 72 hours sounds like a long time until you start filling it. The relay network had been Petrov's idea originally, though he'd spent 3 years telling everyone it was a logistics upgrade. Self-replicating communication nodes seated across 40 star systems, built from salvaged Keth hardware and human engineering, operating entirely outside Council-regulated frequencies. The quarantine would silence our official channels. The relay network would not go dark. It would, if anything, get louder. Because in the 18 hours after the vote, 14 non-council species quietly sent requests to connect. 14. Species we had worked alongside on disaster responses. Species whose worlds had Voss syndrome patients too, who had watched the council price the cure out of reach for populations it considered too small to profit from. They had been waiting to see what we would do. Now they knew, and they wanted in. I left that to Petrov. I had a different problem. 11 hours after the vote, a distress signal reached us through a private channel, not a council relay. It came from a Dravathi colony ship called Reverent Home, drifting without power 4 light hours from the nearest inhabited system. 3,000 Dravathi in cryosleep with failing life support. Their AI had been trying to solve the cascade failure for 9 hours and had not managed it. The Dravathi had not broadcast on council frequencies. They had sent it on a channel that only human ships monitored, because in 11 years of UAD operations, we were the only ones who had consistently answered that channel. The Dravathi held one of the 211 votes that had passed Directive 7 Omega that morning. I pulled 4 people, took the Adamant's fast response shuttle, and went. The Reverent Home was a beautiful ship in the way that things built for a purpose are always beautiful. Long and curved, designed for a species that thought of interior space differently than we did. The Dravathi were tall, slow-moving, and deeply communal. The cryobays were arranged in concentric circles around a central warmth core, the way their cities were arranged around communal fires. Even in crisis, the engineering reflected who they were. The life support failure had started in the secondary thermal regulation system and cascaded through 3 backup arrays in a pattern that the ship's AI kept trying to address sequentially. It needed to be addressed simultaneously, at 4 points, in a specific order that felt counterintuitive, that felt, honestly, like it should not work. But we had seen this exact cascade on a generation ship called Perseverance in 2091, a ship that had no alien technology aboard and no council licensing agreements to worry about, just 800 people and engineers who had to solve an impossible problem with whatever they had. The solution they found was ugly. It violated several principles of thermodynamics in ways that made physicists uncomfortable. It absolutely worked. I split my team. We hit all 4 points in under 6 minutes. The warmth core stabilized. The cryobays held temperature. The AI, when I asked it to run a diagnostic, returned a result that I imagined sounded the way confusion sounds in machine language. The Dravathi elder woke early, a side effect of the thermal fluctuation. His name was something I still cannot pronounce correctly, so he told me to call him Arhen. He was 2.5 meters tall, moved like water finding a new level, and looked at me with the kind of careful attention that meant he was recalibrating something. He asked me why I came. I told him the truth. He called. We came. That was what we did. He was quiet for a moment. His translator rendered silence differently from human silence. There was a low harmonic in it, almost a hum. Then he said the council observer vessel had logged our crossing and would file a report. We were, technically, already in violation of the quarantine perimeter. I told him to send me the invoice. He made a sound that his translator rendered as acknowledgement with unexpected warmth. I think it was the Dravathi equivalent of laughing. We left as the last legal crossing window closed. I watched the quarantine perimeter notification populate on my display, a bureaucratic timestamp, clean and cold. And I thought about the Secretary General's words again. Not the famous part, the part after, that fewer people quoted. We have been patient, because we believed patience was the cost of being new. We are no longer new, and our patience is not the same thing as our limit. The Council Observer vessel was on a parallel heading. I looked at the camera feed, found the angle that would show the clearest picture of me, and waved. 6 months, inside a quarantine, feels different from what you expect. I expected silence. I expected the slow strangulation of cut supply lines and the grinding pressure of isolation. I expected the council to watch us struggle and feel satisfied. What happened instead was that the relay network processed more traffic in its first month of full operation than Earth's official council-licensed communication systems had in the previous 2 years. 14 species became 23. The VOS Cure synthesis package, open source and complete, had been replicated on 11 worlds by the end of month 2. Not for humans, for their own populations. Species the Council had never offered a licensed version to, because the market wasn't worth the administrative effort. The Dravathi elder, Arhen, submitted a formal minority objection to Directive 7 Omega. It was the first formal minority objection filed on a council directive in 31 years. 4 other species co-signed within a week. The council didn't reverse the vote. But it was no longer unanimous. It was uncomfortable. A room that had been full of agreement now had a draft in it, and everyone could feel where it was coming from. I spent those 6 months doing what I always did. There were always calls on that private channel, a mining platform with a structural fracture on a moon that the nearest council team was processing the authorization to reach, a colony in early-stage crop failure that needed immediate soil analysis, a species called the Veth, whom I had never heard of before, stranded on a research station when their transport failed to arrive. Failed because the company that operated it had lost its license in a council regulatory dispute that had nothing to do with the Veth and everything to do with trade negotiations between 2 species who used them as a footnote. We went. Every time. It was not heroic. It was not a strategy. It was simply what we did, because the calls kept coming, and answering them was the only thing that felt like the right shape of a day. I was on the station writing maintenance logs, the part of the job nobody tells you about, when the message arrived through the relay network. It was unofficial, marked with no institutional seal, sent from a personal identifier I did not recognize. The sender identified themselves only as a junior policy staff member of the Keth delegation. The message was 3 sentences. It asked whether, if a formal request were made through unofficial channels, outside the council communication framework, a human response team would consider providing medical support for a developing situation on a Keth-administered research colony. It noted that the situation involved a neural condition affecting approximately 12,000 people. It said the licensed treatment was currently unavailable due to a supply chain interruption that had been classified as a low-priority resolution case. I read it 3 times. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt, because it is easy to frame this wrong. It was not triumph. It was not leverage. I did not think about the 211 votes. I did not think about the quarantine perimeter timestamp, or the observer vessel, or the Secretary General standing in that chamber and telling them exactly where we stopped. I thought about 12,000 people with a neural condition and a supply chain interruption classified as low priority, and what that phrase meant to the people living inside it. I thought about a ship called Perseverance and a fix that should not have worked, and the fact that the most useful things we had ever done had always been the things we had done because someone called and we answered. The power in that message was not that it gave us something over the council. The power was simpler and more durable than that. After 80 years of being told we were promising but required supervision, of being kept small and grateful and dependent, they needed us. Not managed, not contained, not supervised, needed. There is a difference between a species that is tolerated and a species that is necessary. That difference does not live in any vote, any directive, any quarantine perimeter filed on a bureaucratic timestamp. It lives in a private channel that only human ships monitor, and in the fact that when something goes wrong, truly wrong, badly wrong, in a way that doesn't wait for authorization to be processed, someone always sends the signal to that channel. And we always come. I sat with the message for a while. The maintenance logs were still open on the second screen. Petrov had sent me a supply inventory request that I had been ignoring. Through the viewport, a gas giant in a system I still could not name correctly was turning its slow amber rotation against the dark. Then I opened a new message, typed 1 line, and sent it. Send us the coordinates. We'll be there before you expect us. I went back to the maintenance logs. There was work to do. A red line is not a warning. It is a map of exactly who you are when someone decides to test you. They crossed ours. They found out what was on the other side. Not anger, not retaliation, not the kind of power that announces itself and demands recognition. Just us, already moving, coordinates loaded, doing what we have always done.